Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that, well, it starts with a hyperlocal housing anomaly in Ghana, but it actually holds a massive universal economic lesson for all of us. Basically, what happens when public infrastructure just hits a brick wall and the free market has to step in? We're going to explore the incredibly fascinating student housing market at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, or KNSUT for short.
Now listen to this jaw-dropping statistic straight from our source material. Just take a second to process it. By 2023, privately developed hostels outnumber every form of university-provided housing combined by roughly 20 to 1. 20 to 1! How does a university campus go from being a complete state-run housing monopoly to the sprawling private market titan where the private sector is doing literally 20 times the heavy lifting? That is exactly the mystery we're unraveling today.
All right, let's jump straight into part one, the boom nobody regulated. A 40-year flatline meets exponential growth. To really grasp this astonishing market imbalance, we have to visualize how it came to be. See, for most of its post-independence history, student housing at KNST barely qualified as a market at all. Just look at the flat blue line at the bottom. Those are the traditional halls. They're kind of the exhausted veterans of this story, representing direct state investment. They inch up to a handful of facilities right at the start and then nothing, literally a 40-year flatline. But then, check out that aggressive red line shooting up like a rocket post-2000. Those are the privately developed hostels. While the university just stopped building, private capital didn't just step in, it completely took over.
Moving on to part two, admissions outrun the halls. The catalyst for the break.
So, what exactly caused that violent upward break in the red line? Well, the story starts with stagnant state-funded infrastructure. Between 1959 and 1968, the university built 6 traditional halls. These had a combined capacity of just 1,815 rooms. And honestly, they were luxuriously designed for just one student per room. But here's the kicker. A 7th hall was never added. For decades, the physical footprint of the university's housing was just frozen in time at those 1,815 rooms. It's almost as if they expected the student population to just, magically stop growing.
But of course, it didn't. Look at the sheer contrast in the human element here. Back in the 1961 to 1962 academic year, KNUST had just 706 students. Okay, manageable. But by the 2012 to 2013 academic year, admissions surged to over 41,000 students. I mean, you don't need a degree in economics to see the impossible gap forming here. 1,815 rooms for 41,000 students. The math just absolutely does not work.
So how did the university desperately try to absorb this massive gap before the private market took over? Well, first, they packed the halls. 1 student per room became 2, then 3, then 4. Second, they started converting offices and study rooms into makeshift bedrooms. But eventually, even that reached its physical limit. So they had to institute a deliberate policy retreat. They moved to an in-out-out-out arrangement. Essentially, this meant only first-year undergrads were guaranteed a spot in a hall. If you were a second, third, or fourth-year student, you were entirely on your own. The state functionally pushed all that massive overflow of demand straight onto the private market.
This brings us to part 3, the 3 eras of housing, from monopoly to free market.
Breaking this down into 3 chronological phases is a super helpful way to structure our understanding of this whole evolution. From 1957 to 2000, we had the institutional monopoly. The state built the halls, and that was pretty much it. Then from 2000 to 2012, we hit the policy retreat and market entry phase. The university steps back with its in-out-out-out policy, and private capital tentatively steps in to test the waters. Finally, from 2012 to 2023, we see divergence and acceleration. The private market realizes the immense scale of the demand, and development just compounds at warp speed.
Now, to really understand who stepped in during that middle era, we need to clarify the players, because the private market actually split into 2 categories. First, you had the informal homesteads. These are private houses in surrounding communities where the owner or maybe other tenants live right alongside student lodgers. These operations grew pretty slowly, very organically, and they were entirely unrecognized by the university's dean of students. Basically, they were makeshift, neighborhood solutions. But the numbers definitively prove who actually won this market. Just look at the traditional halls, moving from 5 facilities in the year 2000 to just 7 in 2023, a complete government flatline. The informal homesteads grew to 62, but the professionally developed hostels, they went from literally 0 in the year 2000 to 275 facilities by 2023. These purpose-built, privately financed hostels just utterly dominated the market, accounting for the overwhelming majority of all student housing stock.
Which leads into part 4, a law from another era, the regulatory phantom. All right, here is the major twist of our explainer. You've got this massive, hyper-growth private housing ecosystem, 275 facilities strong, right? But it operates completely outside the rent control laws meant to govern housing in Ghana. It's a true regulatory phantom. The timeline absurdity here is honestly incredible. We have regulatory laws like the Rent Act of 1963 and the Rent Control Law of 1986 trying to govern a private hostel boom that didn't even begin until after the year 2000. How on earth could a legislature in 1963 or even 1986 possibly predict, let alone write specific regulations for, a massively capitalized private hostel market that wouldn't exist for another 40 years? Simple answer. They couldn't. You can't weigh the costs and benefits of regulating a market that doesn't physically exist yet.
So the absolutely crucial point is this. It's not just that the hostels are flying under the radar or exploiting some clever timeline loophole. They actually fall squarely into explicit exclusion categories that were written into those old rent control statutes. Because they are let for business use, because the rent sits above the old statutory threshold of 100,000 cedis, and because they operate as furnished premises, these modern professionally managed hostels are legally exempt. They fit these exemptions just as perfectly as a 1960s boarding house would have.
Let's wrap things up with Part 5, the standstill risk, why this misalignment matters.
As we bring this explainer home, we have to look at why this misalignment actually matters today. See, there's an ongoing debate right now about extending rent controls to cover this new hostel market, but doing so comes with a highly precarious standstill risk, and it threatens some pretty catastrophic second-order effects. We have to remember the basic economics at play here. Rent control's entire mechanism works by capping what a landlord may charge, artificially keeping it below what the free market would otherwise bear. If you take these old rent caps and suddenly apply them to this booming new private market, you immediately destroy the financial return calculation that incentivized developers to build all 275 of those facilities in the first place. Whether it's a small local landlord or a huge firm borrowing millions to build a 300-bed block, if the return vanishes, the building simply stops. And that leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question to think about. We know the university has absolutely zero reserve capacity. Their traditional halls haven't expanded in half a century. So, if a rent control extension ruins the financial incentives and private developers completely stop building new facilities, where do the next 40,000 students sleep? Because if the private market stops building and the university cannot house them, the university functionally cannot admit them. A policy meant to make housing affordable could actually end up denying tens of thousands of students an education. It's a fascinating look at the delicate balance of market forces and regulation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the data.